it's not about us. It's not about whether or not we get respected. If you give them respect and you are polite to them and you work with them and you get to know them, then yes. But in the beginning, no. That's the hard part. That's the work that has to be put in. Is you get new kids, and at the beginning of the year, you just have to assume like I'm going to have to put up with a whole bunch of stuff and build a lot of relationships and swallow my pride and check my ego a million times. Because if I do what I'm supposed to do and I build these relationships and I do some proactive things and I treat this kid with respect, 3 months from now, we're going to have a perfect, well oiled little relationship that is kind of a really respectful give and take with things.
And I think that students usually, even if they won't back down and you leave it where you didn't get upset with them and they walk out, they will come back and they will apologize eventually.
Hmm.
They will do some kind of atonement.
Yeah, I mean they're impulsive. It's just when I do de-escalation, I talk about trauma and brain development, and I just want to remind people that teenagers' brains are in a different place than yours. They don't think rationally. I'm not saying they're um, like crazy irrational people, but they're kind of crazy irrational people. Like they're very impulsive. They're very emotional. Um, they're very over analytic of how the world sees them. Um, they definitely put a whole heck of a lot of weight in peer interaction and peer acceptance, and they'll die on the top of that hill rather than be lose face in front of their peers. And understand that and understand they see the world differently. And the best conversations you're going to have with them are away from everybody and when they're calm. I There's a lot of times where I've told kids, even restorative conversations between kids, I'm like, we're not going to do it today because neither of you are in a good place. And I can respect that. It would probably take me a while to cool down and get myself in a better place. So we're going to separate you guys for the day. But tomorrow morning, when you guys get here, we're probably going to sit down and have a conversation. And I've told kids the same thing with me. Like, look, you're super heated at me right now, and I get that. I respect that. I can understand you're angry. Okay. And I can respect your anger. Okay. I'm going to walk away. I'm going to give you some time. And what I'll do is I'll check in with you at the end of the day or tomorrow morning, and I'll see if we're at a place where we can have a conversation. And if we're not, just tell me we're not. It's okay with me. It's not going to offend me. I'm patient. I can wait for you to be ready. And you do that once or twice, and it makes a huge difference. Then the third, fourth time you have an interaction with that kid, they know that they can trust you and that you'll be patient and that you respect them, and they'll calm down quicker and they're ready to have that conversation faster. I think adults have a hard time checking their ego. Like, it's not about you. Check your ego. If you got into this because you wanted to boss kids around, like I said, there's a lot of different jobs you could do.
True. Now let's switch and tell me, because you talk about using positive peer culture
Yes.
that's based on Vorath and Brentro, 1974. I used positive peer culture when I was working in the one room schoolhouse with my residential kids.
Hmm.
I can't imagine using that in an open kind of school like what you have, because all the counseling aspects, everything that the residents did was based on positive peer culture. So we continued it on in the school. How do you do that? How does it work? And if you could just give the listeners and the viewers an idea of what positive peer culture is, and then how you would implement that in your program, or do you?
Yeah, we're starting to. We've been talking about it for a while, and I think that once you've established a good restorative atmosphere, you can start to incorporate positive peer culture. So really, what positive peer culture is it's allowing students to be leaders, allowing students to do to come up with interventions, allowing students to intervene other kids in a therapeutic, helpful, not hurtful way. Creating leaders out of kids and then allowing them to develop that leadership and develop that voice to influence other kids in a positive way. So, first, you have to establish a leadership process. Who are we going to choose as our leaders? What's that going to look like? And then there's a lot of training around that, like how to encourage them to communicate just the general expectations of the school. But when I first started using this, I would use it in my classrooms. I had kids switch classes, and I would typically find really my sort of what I call like the most powerful voice in the classroom, the one kid that all the kids will listen to. And I would start having conversations with that kid about how they really are charismatic. They really have a great leadership vibe that's just natural leadership. And just have conversations around leadership and what that looks like and what they feel like, what kind of leader they would be and what they think expectations in our classroom would be. And once I was able to build a good relationship with that student, I could have all the kids come in and I could just look at that student and say, like, hey, Susie, does it seem loud in here? And that's it. They would stand up and say, hey, guys, excuse me, can we focus up to Mr. McQueen real quick? And everybody get in their seats. And then everybody would get in their seat and sit down. And then I would, I didn't have to go high five them or anything like that. But at the end of class, I'd be like, hey, I appreciate you helping me out, man. That made a big difference. Like, again, you got a lot of charisma. You got a lot of leadership skills. You got to tap into those because you could do amazing things. And that's just in one classroom. Now, when you start developing leadership in your schools, then you can start using those kids in a way where you give them some freedom. I wouldn't say using them, but allowing them to be part of your process. And they become people who can sit in on restorative conversations. They become people who, when a kid is struggling, I can say, do you want me to call Kyle, who's another kid? And maybe Kyle can have a conversation with you real quick. So you can use the kid that's a little bit older to talk to a kid that's a little bit younger, and just high school to junior high or high school to elementary even. And you teach those kids what it's like to be a mentor. You teach them what it's like to be a leader. But you also want to take your kids with a little bit of a quieter voice and team them up with some of your leaders to give them some confidence and to allow them to develop their voice as well. So it's an interesting dynamic, but it makes a huge difference, especially, I mean, just the simplest thing is establish a school leadership team and allow them to have some control. Now, they're not going to run around telling kids to sit down and be quiet and telling them that they're suspended and any of that nonsense. But if you have a major incident with 4 or 5 kids, you might bring those 4 or 5 kids in and 2 or 3 of your leaders and say, let's all sit down and do a circle together. Now, having that peer influence makes a huge difference. And I tell people, like, whenever I do trainings, I don't mean to break people's hearts, but I always say, like, how many of you guys have kids that are 12 and older? And if they raise their hands, I go, well, you're kind of done raising them. Their peers have taken over. Around 12, their peers have more influence than you. And I said, I'll give you an example. I could buy a pair of brand new Air Jordans. Now, my kids are all grown. They're out of school. But when my kids were in high school, I could have bought a brand new pair of Jordans and worn them home and told my kids, check out my kicks. They'd be like, lame, you're lame. Old man in stupid shoes. Now, one of their friends could have bought the same pair of shoes and worn them, and they'd have been like, oh my God, Dad, you've got to get me these pair of shoes. And I'd be like, well, those are the same ones I have. But you look dumb in them. Like, don't wear yours the same day I wear mine. Like, their peers have a way bigger influence than we do. And so you get kind of a twofold win here. One win is that you get to take kids who have that natural charismatic leadership ability and teach them how to use that to grow and be positive and apply it to, even a work world and professional situations, and really tap into that, because they're the kids that are opportunities are going to be, doors are just going to fly open for them based on the fact that they're super charismatic and funny and people are drawn to them. But I would rather you run a small company than run a large gang. So you get to teach those kids how to tap into that just natural, ability and talent. And you also get to have kids bought into your program and bought into what you're doing. And they genuinely are bought in because you're bought into them. Like, I've bought into you enough to give you a voice and respect that voice and take into consideration what you share, and also give you some opportunities to lead some kids and help out with some things. It changes the dynamic if it's done correctly. Now, I've seen it done really poorly too, where you've got your group of leaders and they run around like a bunch of little dictators screaming at people all the time, and then staff backs them up on it. Like, you heard what he said. I'm like, oh my gosh. So now we have bullies that are helping the bullies bully the kids. Like, this is terrible. We've got like 2 levels of bullies. We've got grown ones and half grown ones. if done correctly and done in a way that's supportive and therapeutic and really tapped into that restorative process, it can be hugely effective.
How do you stop the corruption?
You just, and I mean, you call it out. So I would just tell kids, like, I'm not, if I had an issue or something going on and they're like, I want to help, I'm like, I don't think you help therapeutically all the time. I feel like you're kind of mean to people. Like, I would just be honest with them. Like, my job's not to yell at other kids, and your job is surely not to yell at other kids. So I'm going to go find somebody who I think does a little bit better job at this. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you on how I think that could look. But right now, in this moment, you're just not the right person for me.
Do you think maybe that might come from insecurities on their part?
It could be, but I think that it comes from the only time I've seen it happen is it comes from adults allowing them to, because they're kids, they can't handle high levels of power. Most adults don't handle high levels of power. So it's giving them too much power rather than empowering them to have a voice and help other people. When you turn it into you have ultimate power to do whatever you want, well, that's kind of corruptive. But if you tell them you have the power to have a voice that's shared, as long as it's being helpful, we welcome it. Then it teaches them, it
Mhm.
takes work and it takes time to really work with those kids and talk about leadership and what that looks like.
Okay, so let's go into restorative practices, restorative justice,
Yes,
because this keeps coming up, and I think that positive peer culture is in some ways it works hand in hand with restorative justice,
I agree.
and I think that they're just so perfectly matched. So explain the intent behind restorative justice, why people might have an issue with it, and why it works so well.
Well, I think the biggest issue I think people have with it is it's not punitive enough for them. They want it to be punitive. And it's just that's not the idea behind restorative practices. And restorative practices, I mean, historically has been around for a long time. I mean, it could trace it back to tribes on every continent who did some sort of restorative practice. And it's the goal of it is to learn from what you've done and then make amends where amends needs to be made, and then move forward knowing that you can do something differently next time. And so, um, again, I think the problem people have is it's not punitive. I think the hard part about incorporating it is it takes time, it takes energy, and it takes human beings to do work. And that's the biggest, I think, complaint or kickback I get from people is how are we ever going to find time to do this? And like anything, if it's important to you, you'll find time, you'll make time. And, having those conversations and building different sort of thought processes and thought patterns for kids. And there's a lot of different restorative project things that kids can do. There's a lot of things you can tap into in the community. There's a lot of things you can have kids do around the school. Um, doing just restorative conversations or restorative circles is a huge thing. I think people get freaked out about a little bit of it. Like our teachers are taught your circles at the beginning of the year should be completely benign. Like they're not emotional circles. They're like, let's all introduce ourselves. The next circle might be, let's talk about what we enjoy to do on Fridays if we have a Friday fun. You can use it to introduce a topic like, hey, we're going to talk about fractions. Let's do a circle. Tell me what you love and don't like about fractions, and tell me what you know and don't know about fractions. Like you could totally do a KWL circle, but you need to make them so that there's a norm around people sitting in circles sharing thoughts. And then you'll get to okay, our class is struggling as a whole right now. We've got a lot going on. Let's circle up and figure out what's going on. But you can't start your first circle with, let's all sit around in a circle and I want you to tell me if you have trauma and what it's about. Like, whoa, oh my gosh, but you can't do that. um, so, you have to take the time, but you also have to be willing to adapt it. Like I've told English teachers, if you're going to read a book, do a circle and say, we're going to read To Kill a Mockingbird. Has anybody ever heard of this book? What do you know about it? Okay. I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of the characters. This is what Atticus is. He's a lawyer, and this is what he does. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Build some curiosity. Like, circles don't always have to be, you know, and restorative conversations don't always have to involve 50,000 people. It can just be you and the kid. It can be the kid and another kid while you stand back and just monitor the conversation or guide them or praise them. Like, guys, that was great. Man, you guys problem solved like nobody else, man. I'm super proud of you guys. That was amazing.
Do you bring
So,
in paraphrasing into that conversation as well? So if you have two kids in positive peer culture, it'd be two peers who'd be one would say, This is how I felt when you did or said this, because, and then they just say whatever. The other one is taught to paraphrase, not to parrot phrase.
mhm.
And then they come back at them and say that, and then they take it in, and our kids were pretty well versed in it. You could tell if they were just going through the motions,
Yeah.
because then you could be a little more probative. But then they would basically say, okay, here is what you need from me. Here is what I can do. This is what I'm willing to do. And then can we move on? And then everything wraps up.
Hmm. I think I feel statements are great in the beginning because they're really generic and they're a great springboard. Um, but I think you want to get away from them, but not away from the context of them. So if I'm with kids that are a little bit older, then I'll say, look, here's the deal. We're going to sit down. We're going to have a conversation. Only one person gets to talk at a time. When Jared is done talking, we're going to pause. We're going to think. And then, Mark, I want you to tell me what you got from that. What do you think he's trying to tell you in your own words? So basically, I'm telling them to paraphrase without telling them to paraphrase. And then that kid will talk and we'll pause. And I'm like, all right, process that. I don't pause like, let's wait 30 seconds. I just said, process that. Are you good? What do you feel like he was trying to tell you? Now remember, he had something to say. I want you to tell me what you heard, what you got from that. And that's me basically prompting them to paraphrase without using the terms paraphrase. And then when they're done, I'll ask the other kid, do you feel like that's accurate? Do you feel like he understood what you were saying? And if they say no, I'll go, okay, let's try again. Like, explain it differently, maybe for us, so that we can understand. And so I put myself on each kid's side so we can understand. And so now the kid doesn't feel alone or dumb. Like, explain it again because he didn't get it. You know, that's kind of, belittling. But I'm like, all right, explain it so we can understand better. And I'm like, all right, what do you feel like you got out of that? And then ask them, do you feel like that's what he said? Yeah, awesome. All right, now you go and see if we can figure out what's going on. So, I mean, it is a lot of, walking and hand holding in the beginning to make them better communicators and to teach them to pause and to listen for purpose and teaching them to paraphrase without teaching them like when I do trainings with teachers, I teach them to paraphrase and then I have them practice, because it's a training. I'm not in the middle of training if I'm having a restorative conversation, but I kind of am because I'm training them on how to have a healthy restorative conversation. If I can get them good at it, it makes my life easier later because then I can just say, hey, why don't you guys have a restorative conversation? And if they've done a few of them, I can just kick back and watch it happen and jump in when I need to. Like, whoa, you're interrupting. Hold on. Remember the rules? You got to wait till they're done.
I couldn't help but think about restorative justice and the negative implications people have associated with it. And yet, there's the movie like The Mighty Ducks, which is based on restorative justice,
Yeah.
that became so popular.
There's a
So,
great book out there called Touching Spirit Bearer. I used to have my junior high kids read it, and it is 100% restorative justice, um, and it's an amazing book. At the end, I mean, it really does go full circle, and deals with trust and nobody believing you, and the kid's a little criminalistic and probably has some pretty severe behavior and trauma issues, um, but it's a great book, simple read. Young kids can read it. I used to have my middle school kids read Touching Spirit Bear all the time. I probably have 10 copies laying around my schools.
wow, I'll have to look at it. The last thing that I want to cover with you, and this is the biggest umbrella that you have, in the book, and that's relationships.
Yeah.
So, what is it about relationships that people, teachers, administrators, just people in general don't get? Because I know tons of people who say, how do you build a relationship? And it's really interesting that they would even ask that kind of a question.
Hmm.
So, what's your advice on how do you build relationships, and why are they the core of everything that we do?
Well, I think, building relationships with students and with kids that we work with is very different than building relationships like outside of work, like a friendship. Because friendships are very reciprocal. It's a very give and take. I get, but I give, and there's a higher level of trust on those. I share what I feel I can share, and it takes time, but you're building a very high level of trust in a friendship. And it takes a lot of energy and effort and time spending to each other, and there's certain things that attract you to each other. You share the same beliefs or core values or even hobbies. um, that's a whole different world that and that's not how it is with school kids. With school kids, it's I'm going to build a relationship with each and every single kid, and the biggest part of that is it's a give give give, not a take take take. First of all, I don't want to share anything with them. I tell, especially people who work with high school kids or junior high kids, anything you say can and most likely we will be used against you at some point. So don't share your personal information. Please don't share your trauma or any terrible thing that's happened to you. Keep it pretty superficial. Make it about the kid. I want to know more about you. Like, what's going on with you? What can I do for you? And so the relationship is all about you having an open door and an open mind for them to build trust and be reliable and be that solid object, because you want them to trust you for good reason, because you should be trustworthy. You don't want them to trust you as like a game of manipulation. You want them to trust you because you can be trustworthy. And when they trust you, then they're willing to open up to you. And when you are genuinely caring and concerned about their well being, then they feel safe. And if kids feel safe and they feel like they can trust you, the relationship will happen pretty organically. Um, you have to pretend sometimes because kids tell us things that we're not interested in. And we have to, if it's important to them, it's important to me. And so if it's a big deal to you, it's a big deal to me. I tell a story about my daughter and a purple brush all the time, when I do trainings, but I also talk about how sometimes kids will come to us with. I had a kid come to me and he lost his PlayStation 4 or whatever they're up to now, 5, I don't know. And I know he's a big gamer. That's his whole world, for God's sakes. He gets out of school, he games until 1 in the morning. And so he comes to school and he's super mad. And I'm like, oh, dude, what's up, man? I go, you look super pissed, man. Rough weekend? And he goes, my parents took my effing game PlayStation. I go, oh my God. I go, dude, that's your world, man. I go, that's how you connect with all the people, I don't know, probably around the world at this point. I was like, I don't get PlayStation, but I know you all can get online and do whatever. And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, man, why'd they take it? He said, well, because I didn't come home. And I go, what do you mean you didn't come home? And he's like, well, I went out on Friday with my friends and I just didn't come home till Sunday. And I'm like, dude, you just didn't come home for like 48 hours? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, oh. I go, I'm glad you're safe, man. I don't want to know what you were up to. Okay. But I'm glad you're safe. I can imagine your parents are freaking out, dude. He's like, yeah, but they took my PlayStation. I was like, man, that sucks. They took your PlayStation. Now I'm thinking in my mind, 100% they took your PlayStation. I probably would have thrown it out the window and smashed it. You let one of my kids. I want to sympathize with him, but I'm also thinking, I'm like, man, I mean, when do you get it back? Well, like in a week. And I'm like, that's not bad. Like you could handle a week, right? I go, dude, yeah, your PlayStation, you love that. That's a big deal to you, man. Why do you think they took it though? Do you think it's just because you didn't come home for 48 hours? Yeah. Do you think a week is too long or do you think a week is fair? Like, what's your thoughts on that? And it's amazing how often they're like, I mean, I guess it's kind of fair. They understand. But I don't want to go, well, yeah, of course they took your PlayStation because you didn't come home for 24 hours. I would have freaked out if I was you. I would have, I'm like, I want to sympathize with like, oh my God, the PlayStation. Oh, you know, if it's serious to them, it's serious to me. And even when it's not serious to me, like I'm happy he lost his PlayStation in reality. I'm like, hell yeah, good, you know. but I want to be that person that's like, oh my gosh, because I understand how important it is to them. So we have to do those things. We have to pause and take a minute and relate with them and understand them and ask those questions about them. I mean, all of us as humans love to talk about ourselves. It's just we get conditioned not to, you know, because you're braggadocious or arrogant or that's all you talk about is you. So we get conditioned over time not to. But if people ask us about ourselves, we love to share. And so take that time and ask the kids about themselves. Not intrusive questions, that's too much, but the little things. It makes a difference, and that relationship is going to change your entire world with that kid. And some kids are hard to have relationships with. Some kids, I tell teachers, look, you're not going to like every kid that comes across your path. You're a human being. You're not going to love and like all the human beings you come in contact with. But if you don't like a kid, they should never know. They should think that, by golly, you just think they're the bee's knees. And if that means that you come in and you have to put on your thespian face, you got to put on that mask and do a little acting, then you act your butt off. Okay. At the end of the year, they'll go away. That's what happens. They go to another grade. And you can say, okay, I did a really good job. But by no means should they ever know that you go home at night and go, oh my God, Joe. Ugh. You know, it shouldn't happen. They should feel equally as appreciated as all the other kids, and you should make equal effort to have a relationship with them. In fact, that's probably your bigger challenge. Think of it as a challenge. What am I going to
Great advice. Okay, now your book.
Yes.
We've been talking about a lot of the ideas in the book and things that you put out, the things that you give trainings on. Where can people buy it?
It is on Amazon. If you just go on Amazon and you put Calming Young Minds by Joseph McQueen, it'll pop up and you can read it. And then I give a review. Unless you're going to give 1 star, then just keep that to yourself. You can email me. Um, but it's available. It ships pretty quickly. I think that I designed it to be a really easy read for people. I also put little projects in there so you could use it as a book study if need be. And I think it's a little bit fun. It's not 900 pages. You could do it in like a week or two and carry it around in your back pocket.
I was able to read it in 48 hours.
That's good.
But I'm a fast read, and it was just absolutely affirming everything that I knew. And I still learned a lot. It's
Good.
always nice to have reinforcement, but there are always these other takeaways that you can take with it. So, and Philip, I'm sorry that he couldn't be here today, but he was talking about how he just thought it was one of the best books he's read as far as working with our students.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, because it's clear. It talks about what we need to know, and it's just there. And so it's in a conversational kind of language. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, thank you for reading it.
And I am putting all your information down in the show notes.
Oh, good.
And I'm also putting them up here for the YouTubes.
Okay.
And so I is there anything else that you want to leave us with before you go?
I guess my only shameless plug would be I do have an LLC, Therapeutic Perspectives. I come out to schools. I'm more than happy to spend 2 or 3 days with you and really walk through these things with your staff, even willing to come out and walk around your school and hang out and give you some just observation on culture and climate among the students and teachers and things like that. Um, I think that long term, I'd just like to try to teach all the teachers to approach education um, from a different lens, and administrators as well. Like there's a different way we could be doing this that's a lot more therapeutic, and if you do it, it will minimize your problems in your school, especially if you do it right, if you do it with integrity um, and patience, because it's hard. Change is hard. Again, I would have a six-pack and abs or big muscles, but if you put in that work, that self work, and that change, and really make it part of your culture, it makes a difference. I mean, I run an alternative school. I've got 140 kids, and we have minimal incidents. Our incidents are, I mean, the things that we get hyped up about, I think to myself over the years, I'm like, this is nothing. Like, you guys are all excited because we don't have that many incidents, and we had a kid knock over a chair and cuss, like, like that's not that big of a deal. We had it happen once, and you guys are freaking out. We'll be okay, you know.
It sounds like you're that the problems that you have are minimal.
They are, but there's a lot of work that's done proactively to keep them minimal. When I first got here to this school, it was, yeah, it was not good. Very mob mentality, kids fighting, breaking things, coming in, under the influence of drugs, throwing chairs, fighting teachers. We just don't have that anymore. It just doesn't. I mean, I don't even have kids fighting kids. Not that I'm, minimizing that, but they don't even fight each other. They come talk to an adult, and then we have a restorative conversation.
So maybe that's another conversation we can have about how do you go in and change a school culture
Mm.
to make it to take it from being toxic to being therapeutic.
Time and patience, and a lot of monitoring and follow through. And sometimes you gotta remind people that maybe they would be better somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I am going to say to all of our listeners, have a great week. We will see you later. And until then, adios.